Hey everyone, my name is Alan Goldbig. I am a consulting engineer in security at Jamf. Today, along with Bob Gendler from NIST and Dan Brojeski from NASA, we are going to talk about what's new with the macOS Security Compliance Project and how you can integrate it with Jamf Pro. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the project, it's an open source project hosted by NIST on GitHub. The goal of the project is to provide a programmatic approach to generating security configuration guidance for macOS. To speak more about that, I'm going to hand things off to Bob.
Hello. This project, the macOS Security Compliance Project, started as a joint effort between some individuals from NIST, NASA, DISA, and Los Alamos National Laboratory. The macOS Security Compliance Project wasn't just created by these agencies. This was created by Mac admins who were members of those agencies. This was created by Mac admins who had to solve this very problem for their Macs. This was created by Mac admins like you who were told by their CISOs to make our Macs more compliant and secure and had to figure out what to do. This was created by Mac admins just like you who faced a lot of the same problems you may face today. And now we also have contributions from the folks at Jamf and CIS, the Center for Internet Security. So this project isn't just a joint agency project, it crosses those government and commercial bridges. This project is also officially supported by Apple. With this page on the Security Certifications and Compliance Center, they're saying this is what people should be using for security compliance. How many open source projects have an Apple support page pointing to them? And for those that remember the old NIST 800-179 that covered macOS security, this document was last updated for macOS 10.12. Not macOS 12, but macOS 10.12, so it's pretty old. That document has been withdrawn and superseded by the NIST 800-219. Now, with the NIST Special Publication 800-219 covering the compliance project, NIST is fully backing the macOS Security Compliance Project, saying here is guidance for automated secure configuration for macOS. Now, how do we line up with major OS releases? The compliance project was publicly released as a sort of 0.9 pre-release on June 9, 2020. macOS Catalina was released October 7, 2019. We released our guidance on October 6, 2020. Now, it didn't line up very well with the release of the system, but we were building the entire macOS Security Compliance Project during the lifecycle of macOS Catalina. So while it did take a year after the release of the operating system, this has not been the case moving forward. Big Sur was released on November 12th, 2020, 1 month after our guidance for Catalina. We released compliance guidance on November 10th, 2 days before the release of the operating system. So how about macOS Monterey? It was released on October 25th, 2021. How did the compliance project do with Monterey? We released our guidance for macOS Monterey 5 days prior to OS release. This is unheard of. Once the operating system is released in a beta at WWDC, we begin work on the new features within the system that may need to be managed for compliance. This is done in private, as releasing this information publicly may violate user agreements since the beta for the developers in the Apple Seed program. However, when the operating system is released as a public beta, we begin work publicly with a branch on the macOS Security Compliance Project GitHub page. While we don't do a full release at this point, you can use the information in GitHub to begin securing your devices that may be running the beta version of this system. Then, when the operating system hits release candidate, we do a full release with fully vetted and finalized compliance information. We also merge that branch to become the main branch in the GitHub project, as this is now or shortly will be the most current shipping system from Apple. After the operating system is released, we continue to update the compliance information. We may review the compliance references and update it. We may tweak the checks, or if there are new features released by Apple, we may implement them. if they're relevant. Our plan is to support N-2, as this is the general support Apple gives to its operating systems. So pretty soon, we will no longer be updating the information for macOS Catalina, for example. Now, what about macOS Ventura? Well, we've begun work on the GitHub right now. You can begin generating compliance information against macOS Ventura, for macOS Ventura, today if you want it. While we have no idea when it'll be released, we're well on our way to being ready to release shortly before it is. As we continue to develop and update the macOS Security Compliance Project, we are constantly addressing issues, reviewing feedback, and making improvements to the project in order to keep up with the Apple OS lifecycle. Here's Dan to discuss a handful of these changes in a bit more detail.
Project and how easy it is to generate compliance documentation for your organization. One of our goals has always been to continue streamlining this process to get security compliance for macOS deployed quickly and as automated as possible. Today, we're going to look at 3 recently added features to the project. If you've been keeping up with our updates to our OS branches, you've probably seen some of these changes unfold as we commit our updates to Git. Let's talk about them in a little bit more detail. Organization-defined values, or ODVs, are values determined for controls that meet both the security and functional requirements in an organization. Benchmark authors like DISA and CIS provide these values for the respective published guidance. In the project, we include recommended values, as well as the defined values for the DISA STIG and CIS benchmarks as part of the ODV field in the YAML. Customizing these values for your organization is one of the new features recently added to the project as part of tailoring. You can see that anywhere in the rule that has a definable value, there are now ODV placeholders. As part of the generation of guidance, these placeholders are then filled with the corresponding values in the ODV field. Currently, the ODV placeholder can be used in the title, the discussion, the check, the result, and the fix fields. You can see here the ODV section in the YAML includes the values to be used when generating the guidance documents. The ODV placeholder is also supported in the mobile config info section. Now, when we discuss baselines or benchmarks, we sometimes interchange which word we're using when referring to them. Since we added some of the tailoring functionality, we have come to settle on how these terms are going to be used going forward. Baselines provide a starting point for organizations in the security and privacy control selection process. Special Publication 853B includes 3 security control baselines, one for each system impact level. We have a low, a moderate, and a high, as well as a privacy control baseline that is applied to systems irrespective of impact level. The rules in the project are mapped to 853 security controls to identify how macOS can be configured to meet these controls. Benchmarks, on the other hand, define which controls are to be included along with the ODVs recommended by the benchmark's authors. The DISA STIG, for example, is the selection of controls and values outlined by the DoD to meet their security requirements. When selecting which rules to include and defining the values to be used, you are, in effect, creating your own organization's benchmark. The project makes it simple for organizations to select which controls they need, along with the ODVs they decide are viable to meet their security needs. Whether you are starting from one of the 853 control baselines or customizing an already established benchmark. Running the generate baseline script with the -t argument will step you through the tailoring process. Later on, Alan will show this in a bit more detail. After running the generate baseline script using the tailoring option, the resulting baseline file now only includes the rules that you chose to include. Now you can still modify the baseline.yaml file manually if you know the rule IDs that you want to add or remove. And note that we have a new field called parent values. This references the ODV information to be used when generating the guidance. If you are building against an already established benchmark, this field will have the name of that benchmark. Otherwise, it does default to recommended. Let's talk a little bit about updates to the compliance script. One of the biggest changes to the generated compliance script is the handling of multiple functions passed via arguments. Typically, when attempting to remediate findings, you want to follow up the modifications with a new compliance scan to see that those settings were applied. Now you can call the compliance script with both the check and the fix arguments, and it'll run both processes. First the fix, followed by the check scan, without the need to call the script a second time. Additionally, we've updated the parsing options so that no additional modifications are needed when using the script directly from Jamf Pro. In the past, we would recommend editing a handful of lines to go within the compliance script prior to adding it to Jamf Pro. Now you can take the script as is, copy it up to your server, and you're ready to go. Now, speaking of Jamf Pro, here's Alan to show you more on how easy it is to integrate mSCP into your Jamf Pro environment.
Thanks, Dan. So now that we have learned about the goals of the project and the features we've added recently, let's go over how to take what the project can produce and make use of them in Jamf Pro. Before we can generate anything, you'll need to first clone the repo from GitHub. One thing to note here is that the very first thing you do after you've cloned it is to check out the OS branch you are working on. Main is only updated when we do major releases of the project. Between releases, all updates are made to either Catalina, Big Sur, or Monterey, or Ventura going forward. Once you've checked out that OS branch, you'll need to install a few Python modules and Ruby gems. The instructions for getting started can be found in the project's wiki page. Over time, we've been working on making the getting started process easier. With that said, you no longer have to provide an admin password to install those Ruby gems. Even easier, a recent change will install them for you during the guidance generation stage. So now comes the fun part. Let's go over how we can take everything we generate, the compliance script, configuration profiles, EAs, and apply them to our macOS fleet to ensure that your systems are compliant, whether you're trying to meet guidance from CIS, dysastig, or your own tailored baseline. First up, we're going to take a look at generate baseline. The generate baseline script is used to, generate a baseline. We use this script internally anytime we add or remove rules from the project, for example, when a new OS is released. The generate baseline script can also be used when wanting to generate a baseline for your organization. This can be done in a few ways, but today I'm going to show you how you can use an existing baseline provided by the project and tailor it to your organization. So the first thing we do is load our Python virtual environment that we use for our project. And then we're going to call the generate baseline script against CIS level 2 benchmark. We're going to add that that -t argument that Dan spoke about earlier, and we're going to be prompted what we want to name our baseline. Let's just call that JNUC 2022. We're then going to be greeted with a message about tailoring existing benchmarks, as well as a prompt to see if we want to add a rule or not. For this demo, we're going to add a few rules, and for the sake of time, I've sped this up. You may have noticed that we also are being prompted if we want to add a rule, but also if we're asked if we want a value to be set to. This is an example of a rule that contains an organization-defined value. You're always presented with a default value, which is based on a baseline or benchmark you're tailoring against. If you deviate from that suggestion, the ODV variable will substitute the variable or the value when generating the guidance, and you'll see that in our next demo. Now, this may seem like it takes a bit, but this is designed to be maybe run once or twice. And then once we're done with this, we'll have our custom baseline as well as some custom rules which contain the ODV values that we generated during that tailoring process. And that will be able to be seen in just a moment. So here is our baseline that is generated with the rules that we decided to add. And you can see it's called JNUC 2022. And here are examples of the custom ODV or the custom rules with the ODV field that will be substituted when generating that compliance script or the generate guidance script. Next up is the generate guidance. This script is used to take the baseline we just created and generate an HTML and PDF guide compliance script, configuration profiles, and much more. Here's our baseline file, which we generated just a minute ago. I've gone ahead and added ourselves as authors, and we're going to head back to terminal and run the generate guidance script and pass a few arguments to ensure we generate all the things. We're going to point it to our custom baseline, and we're also going to add some custom branding for our documentation. Once that finishes, we're going to head over to Finder to take a look at what we've got. First up, we have our compliance script, which we'll be adding to Jamf Pro in just a minute. Quick note, you can run this script interactively from terminal, and we even have a nice little interactive menu if you want to test it out. Next up is the ASCII doc file, which we use to generate both the HTML and PDF guides, which now include our lovely new logo. As I scroll down, you'll see that the author field is filled in, and some other general templates that can be edited. As well, once we get down, you'll see that we have our ODV value for our role that we added when generating the baseline. We have our PDF, and Bob's favorite, our spreadsheet, which contains all the fields from our controls and our baseline, which can be handed over to an auditor if you choose to. Finally, we have our configuration profiles, which are tied to all the controls. You may have noticed in the beginning of the video that I added the -h argument with a SHA-1 value. That was the subject key of my signing certificate. So now when you generate, not only will you have p-lists for your profiles, you'll also have unsigned and now signed. So let's take a quick review of everything that can be generated by the project. We have our ASCII doc, which is used to generate both an HTML and PDF guide, our Excel spreadsheet for your auditors, the configuration profiles and p-lists, unsigned and signed, a compliance script, some additional YAML files if you're running some of the other scripts from the project, as well as some SCAP content via XML. So now that we have everything, let's bring that into Jamf Pro. First, we're going to talk about configuration profiles. The project gives you the option to pick how you apply those profiles. Our general recommendation is to use the built-in profiles in Jamf Pro as much as possible. One area where you may want to use profiles from the project are the restriction payload, as you can get a little more granular here. Finally, if there's a profile that's not in Jamf Pro yet, you'll want to either upload a signed configuration profile or use a custom profile under Application and Custom Settings payload. Now what happens if you have a user who requests deviations from your baseline? How can these be documented? Bob wrote a pretty cool script which can be used with the Application's Custom Setting payload utilizing the External Applications feature in Jamf Pro. You just run the generate JSON script against your custom baseline and you'll get a JSON file, which then not only allows you to set exemptions, but also document why that user is looking to be exempt. The exemption and reason will be added to your log and plist files when running your compliance script so that you can use those for reporting, which we'll see in just a little bit. Next are the extension attributes, which can be used to report on whether or not a system is compliant or not. The macOS Security Compliance Project is an open source project, and with that comes a great community. A member from our community, Jordan Burnett, has a couple of extension attributes on his GitHub page, which can be used to report on the following: what baselines a system falls under, are there any exemptions in place, what the failed count is, and what are those rules that failed. One thing to note here, even though you have an exemption that for a control, you're still going to have a finding, and that will be added to the failed result list. It will not be applied to the failed result count, and this is important as we're going to use this for building out our smart groups in just a bit. Many of the controls in the project can be applied via a configuration profile, but many of them are still set via a binary or by editing a comp file. For those, we need to have a script that can remediate these controls, as well as the ability to audit the values that are being set by the configuration profiles. Once you've uploaded that script into Jamf Pro, we can set up some policies. You're going to need two policies, one to audit and one to remediate. For the audit policy, we're going to run this once every day and trigger it on a system's recurring check-in. Now, we're doing it one day, but every organization is different. Some people will do one day, some people will do every 12 hours. It's really up to your organization how often you want this check to run. We're going to add that script, and then we're going to add -- check under parameter 4. You're always going to want to make sure that you update that inventory so that the extension attributes get updated. And we're going to scope this to all of your managed devices. We're going to create some smart computer groups. We're going to have compliant and non-compliant. These are going to be based off the criteria that gets generated via the extension attribute failed results count, which we've uploaded earlier. If the count is more than 0, then a system's not compliant. So now that we have those smart groups in place, we can now set up the remediation script. So let's go ahead and create a new policy that also runs on the recurring check-in, but this time we're going to set it on an ongoing frequency. In the script field, we're going to add -- fix to parameter 5, along with -- check in parameter 4. So as Dan said, when you run this policy, the script will first remediate any controls that are not properly applied, but then run a check so that the plist and logs get updated with your new findings. Again, update your inventory so those extension attributes can be updated. And this time, instead of scoping to all managed clients, let's scope it against the smart group that we've created earlier for non-compliant. So now that we have our policies in place, whenever a system is enrolled in Jamf Pro, they'll automatically be audited once a day or the value your organization has defined, and remediate if the value is not set for a specific control. So that's how you can use the project with Jamf Pro. That's it. Once you've uploaded those scripts, apply the profiles, and added those extension attributes and smart groups, you're set to go. But wait, there's one more thing.
There's one more thing. There are tons of security compliance frameworks out there. HIPAA, FINRA, Cybersecurity Essentials, ISO. It's an alphabet soup of compliance. While we don't directly support these within the project, we do have the ability to generate custom rule files with the generate mapping script. This takes a CSV mapping between a supported and non-supported framework in the project and builds the required custom rule files. You can find mappings between two frameworks all over the place. But there's one website out there, Secure Controls Framework, that has a giant Excel file of nearly 150 framework mappings. What if we use the power of the Security Compliance Project to leverage that? Let me show you a script I wrote that takes advantage of that site. You can find that script on my personal GitHub, as it's not officially part of the project, but it uses the project. So clone the script, copy the script down however you want it to get it on your machine. Run the script, point it to where you have the repo clone with the -R option. Then select the entry for the framework you want. So here we're picking 146 for HIPAA, and boom, it generates all the mappings, moves the files, builds the baselines, all with all the required files. But just as a warning, these mappings are never perfect. They may get you 75, 80% of the way there, which is way better than 0%, but they definitely require someone to review them.
So that's it. thanks for coming, and especially thanks to the community. We have a Slack channel called macOS Security Compliance in the Mac Admin Slack, and it's a growing community with great feedback and great members, as well as thanks to everyone who has either filed an issue or a pull request, or who has just, joined in discussion. And one other thing to note, there are two other talks at JNUC this week that are tied to the macOS Security Compliance Project, one by Tony Williams and another one by Misha Vanderbent. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.